Steve, I want to talk to you a little bit about how developers can effectively evaluate whether a CDMO's capacity planning and schedule models can actually and truly accommodate multimodal programs without bottlenecks or risks. So from the developer side, what does that evaluation look like?
Yeah, yeah. So what you want to see is evidence of two things. One is process maturity, and the second is digital maturity. You want to see that they have a thoughtfully designed, digitally enabled system they're using for planning, not just a great Gantt chart that they do in Excel. That's just not going to work for the complexity that we have in cell and gene. So from a process maturity perspective, you want to make sure that they have documented processes that they actually follow, and that they train their staff on. Planning is traditionally not GXP, so there's no auditor coming to make sure that they're actually doing training on planning and that stuff. And traditionally, planning is all tribal knowledge. You just learn from the people around you, but with a lot of the changeover and turnover of talent, you lose that very quickly. And so you rely on talent as opposed to knowledge that is institutionalized. So making sure that they have document processes, that they're actually following it. And then from like a system perspective, do they actually have capacity models across the suits, across the equipment? Are they taking into consideration the dependency between vector, drug product, and QC capacity, for example? Are they actually able to simulate different scenarios? Like, what if we did this versus that? Like, how does that impact planning? So if you don't see that, that should be a red flag. If you see that, you're probably in good shape.
Good. Okay. I want to talk a little bit now about managing risk and ensuring compliance. And of course, expanding into multiple modalities raises questions about risk and quality and compliance. And development teams can't really afford blind spots here, especially when different platforms are housed under one roof. So I want to talk about how companies are managing it and sometimes underestimating the risks. And so, Michael, I'll start with my first question for you. When outsourcing multiple modalities, what red flags should cell and gene therapy developers look for in a CDMO's contamination control or quality management systems? Like, what really sticks out that they should be avoiding?
Well, the one thing that comes to mind immediately is, and I wrote this down in my notes, how do we manage quality drift? I've seen a lot of CDMOs that they'll bend over backwards or multiple clients, and what that results in is a quality systems that are applied differently across different clients. That to me speaks to inconsistency. So that's one of the first things I look at, and I can typically see that. The other thing is contamination control. Are the procedures in place? Are people trained? And is it obvious that they are? I don't know what else to say there.
Yeah, so maybe I can bounce up on that. So the way I look at it is anything that relies on people just being careful instead of like real solid engineering controls. This concept that you guys might have heard of from like in Japan for like manufacturing Toyota cars, it's called poka yoke, which again is just a form of engineering control, and like digital traceability is a red flag. So when we talk about poka yoke and the controls, think about it this way: if risk prevention is just SOPs and double witnessing, you're definitely exposed. What you want to see is physical segregation wherever it makes sense, like for all the raw materials across the different freezers, fridges, all that, and then error proofing, right? So that poka yoke concept. So, for example, this could be just having different fittings or different connectors for different products, so that you literally can't connect the wrong line for the wrong product combination. Like you want to see that type of risk mitigation.
Sure. I want to get on to, we have questions that came in from the audience that I do want to get to. Before we do, real quick, Steve, while I have you, how early in the partnership can or should developers start auditing for cross-contamination risks? We hear the word early all the time, and it's one of those, I wouldn't even call it a buzzword. It's not a buzzword, but it's a word that's so difficult to define. And I was wondering if you could just give us a little bit of information on that.
Yeah, so what I've seen is the best practice is earlier than you're comfortable with is the idea there. So before you even think about tech transfer, you want to do that, and then you want to do it again right before you do your first human runs. So early is, and that's the best answer I can give.
Sure. Thank you. I want to cover this question that came in from Maria. She's saying that she would like to ask about the twin model. Could you test sources of possible cross-contamination, or even in non-dedicated equipment, risk of sharing equipment between batch and projects? So could you test sources of possible cross-contamination is what I think she's asking ultimately. And I would pose that to either one of you. And we can always come back to it, actually, if that's...
Yeah, if we can come back to that, because I just found it in the chat. Let me think about that, yeah.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit more about digital tools. So Steve, for you, how are digital tools how are they such a predictive analytic or to monitor risk, compliance, capacity across different modality platforms? So predictive analytics, that type of thing.
Yeah, this actually might answer that question now that I think about it. So a big thing to consider is, and one of the things that it's most underestimated is how variable and patient-dependent cell therapy processes are. It's not just one critical process parameter or critical quality attribute. You've got all of these different set points and operating ranges, and they're all heavily influenced by the starting material, your patient population, but also all the different things that you're introducing to the process, contamination, whatever this might be. And all those things can drive out of spec events and like longer turnaround times just by default when you're having issues. And so what we're seeing is, and what we're recommending is moving from after action reporting, like after everything, we see what happens, to this concept of in-process prediction. So basically you're using digital twins and analytics to spot the risk before it hits the patient and the batch. So like, think of at the process level, you're seeing your MES and your like whatever cloud native platform that you're using capture data every few seconds. If you can actually do that, that's going to enable models that can predict batch success or failure. It can flag risk to the critical process parameters, and it can help you prioritize which deviations to investigate first. And then you can actually create deliberate process changes to basically solve for those things that you're seeing. A big thing too that is very much readily available nowadays is like having like risk dashboards that tie together all the deviations that you're having, environmental monitoring complaints, like any supply disruptions, and then you can have a cross-functional team like of QA, your operations people, your supply chain people, all look at that same risk picture and work together to kind of define actions to prevent the issues that you're seeing.
Sure. Maria, hopefully we response there to your question. If not, just let us know and we'll tackle it again. I want to move and innovation, which is a big part of this discussion, of course. And so, with risk in mind, it's important to the innovation happening across modalities. And I want to talk a little bit about how emerging technologies influence outsourcing strategy. Mike, I have a question. Approaches are often cited as simpler to manufacture and scale. Where are you seeing the most progress? What operational advantages do these platforms bring, even broadly? What do you think?
So, I'm not an expert in any individual modality, and I'm an ops guy. To me, it's a process. As long as the process is defined, I'm going to execute that process. But if we think about it at a high level, yeah, I want to get rid of vector. I don't want to see vector in my facility. It's a contamination risk, it's a safety risk, and I would absolutely love to get rid of it. On the other hand, a new modality, is it safe? How does it impact our clinical trial, right? Am I imparting more complexity in the process? So I think, yeah, I would love to get rid of a main source of regulatory concern to my process. It'd be awesome. But the new process, is that bringing up a whole other set of questions, right? So we have to think about safety. We have to think about execution, raw material supply, and things like that. If I don't have to have vector made, which is essentially another BLA, that's huge advantage, not just in timing, but in cost as well. So yeah, I would love to go to a non-vector or an alternate technology, but we also have to understand it's just another process, and all processes have pluses and minuses.
Yeah, sure, sure. Thank you for that thoughtful response. While I have you, Mike, are you seeing meaningful differences in reliability or manufacturability between viral and non-viral platforms as they mature? Um, and what does that even mean for future outsourcing?
Well, I mean, we'll start, with vector or viral manufacturing, again, a more traditional batch process, and we're looking
Sure.
at, the evolution of those processes, I think are mirroring what we've seen back in the early 90s with monoclonals. Remember, originally monoclonals were in CBER, and those were unknown processes. And I remember back in the old days, I started my career at this little company called IDEC. Um, and we had a partnership with this other small company called Genentech, and the comment was, we're never going to characterize these products. And now, today, monoclonals are CDER, and everybody knows how to make them, right? I see that same evolution with AAV. AAV5, we're going to have yields come up. We're going to have these processes be much more technically robust. They're going to solve the yield issues and things like that. On the cell therapy side, we're talking about automation, right? Getting rid of open manipulations. I have a cell therapy process that requires a media feed every 3 days for 40 days, right? That's a lot of personnel interaction and probably 80% of your cost of goods, right? If I can automate that, and we're seeing that, I'm great. Same thing with scale-up models. We look at history of cell therapy. We had, Wilson Wolf come along with the G-Rex's perfectly scalable bioreactor model, right? That kind of replaced the Zuris, right? And then now Cytiva, they still sell the Zuris, but there's just different technology, and we're implementing it. But where is that technology helping us? In contamination control, automation, things like that. So I see that that's where the evolution is going. To address what Steve was saying, it's the same thing on the digital side, right? Like, before the call, we had this conversation. Back in the early days, I happened to be the first person ever to be audited for Part 11 back in the day, and I went through multiple EBR programs back in the 90s, and everyone failed. Why did they fail? The technology wasn't there. We're not Smuckers making jelly every day, a consistent process. We had to apply it. Well, now you have these systems, we can apply them, and EBRs are becoming a standard. I can go to there's a CDMO that I was recently up in Boston that fully digital, love it. Now I could surveil the process remotely, especially if there's cameras. I love that.